I want to share what I know about the murder of Lester Bauguess. He was shot on June 13th, 1932 by his father, Joe Bauguess. And this is a picture of Joe. The shooting happened 2 days before Lester's 23rd birthday. I've heard a lot about this shooting from several people, and of course each person remembers things a little differently and remembers different parts of the story. Many of them actually heard the story from older generations, and of course over a period of 80 years different versions of exactly what happened have evolved over time, and that would be the case for any story like this. And for that reason I'm going to try to stick to the facts with this discussion and present the information that I've found. Okay, first I want to introduce Joe's family. Here we have, in the center is his wife Ora, and in the back, children Burley, Ennis, and Emma, and then in the front, Annie, Theodore is the baby, and then this is Lester over here on the right. This is actually the only picture I have of Lester. He was born in 1909. One other daughter, Inez, would be born about in 1915, probably just after this, soon after this picture was taken. So that is his family. A good place to start with the murder of Lester Bauguess is with his death certificate, and that's what I have here. A few things we can learn from looking at this. He died at Wilkes Hospital. Wilkes Hospital. And that's not the Wilkes Regional Medical Center that exists today. This was actually a much smaller hospital located on 8th Street in North Wilkesboro. It had somewhere between 15 and 25 beds, so it's much smaller than what's there today. And this hospital was actually in operation from 1923 to 1953. And was run by this man right here, Fred C. Hubbard. And actually two other doctors ran the hospital with him. And Dr. Hubbard played a significant role in building Wilkes Regional Medical Center, which opened in 1952. Among other things, he donated the 19 acres where it was built. And I thought that was interesting that he was the attending physician for Lester. A few other things we can get from this is exactly when he was attended to. So I know it's hard to read here. I'm going to put these documents on my website so that it might be easier to read there. But he was attended to from June 13th, the day he was shot, to June 20th. So he was in the hospital for a week before he died. And here we have the cause of death: infected gunshot wounds, right thigh and right hand. So he could have been shot once through the hand into the thigh, or maybe he was shot twice. I don't know. But anyhow, two gunshot wounds that got infected. A few other things we can learn from this. Here it lists his parents, Joe and Ora. His mother, Mrs. Joe Bauguess, was the informant, and he was buried at Stony Ridge on June 21st, the day after he died. Okay. While he died in North Wilkesboro, the shooting took place in Trap Hill at home. So this is Joe Bauguess's home, and he owned this piece of land right here, and maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, but that's the general idea. And the Bauguess family cemetery was on the northern edge of his land. I don't know exactly why Joe shot Lester. From what I've heard, Joe wasn't a very nice guy much of the time. I've heard stories where he shot at people, not necessarily shooting them, but shot at them. And I've heard about times where he didn't treat his wife and kids like he should have. that mixed with liquor and bootlegging, and I'm sure that all likely played a role in what happened on this day. In any case, when Lester was shot, someone went to get help. So they went from his house through a path, a road, a trail, depending on the situation, down to Charlie Billings' house. And his wife, Nan Billings, was a midwife, an unofficial nurse. She was the closest thing in the neighborhood to quick medical help. And this is a picture of Charlie and Nan. So somebody went to get her, and then they went back down this path. And this is about 3/4 of a mile, of course, each way. So I'm through the hills and valleys and down the path. It must have been at least 20 minutes before she was able to get there and attend to Lester. And Nan wasn't only a neighbor. She was actually related to Joe and Lester. So what I'll do, I'll kind of show that relationship. So here's Nan, and she was married to Charlie. Well, Charlie's sister was Ora. So I'll put Billings. They were Billings. Nan was a Bauguess. That was her maiden name. And Ora, as I said earlier, was the wife of Joe. So Nan was the sister-in-law of Joe's wife. But in addition to that, Nan's father was John Bauguess, and he was a brother of Joe. So Nan was his niece as well as his wife's sister-in-law. And these Bauguess and Billings families were very related in this area. But so Nan did all she could do to help him until arrangements could be made to somehow transport him to the hospital in North Wilkesboro. And as I said, Lester died a week later. Okay. During that week, Joe was simply guilty of shooting his son, which is a bad enough crime. But when Lester died, Joe became guilty of murder. And it was 2 months later, on August 9th, 1932, when Joe appeared in court. But what I found interesting was Joe was not alone. John Bauguess was also brought in with him, and John was Joe's nephew. And actually, John Bauguess is my great-grandfather, so I was surprised to find that he was involved in this as well. And they were both charged with murder. And what I have here is, well, at the top here is a picture of Joe with his wife Ora, his son Burley, and Annie, and daughter Annie. And this is a picture of John Bauguess, the, I guess, co-defendant in this case. But they were brought in before the court on the charge of murder. And at this arraignment, the court determined, and that's what this document says here, the court determined that a grand jury would decide whether they should be indicted for the crime. And the grand jury was to look at the evidence and talk to witnesses to determine if there was reason to indict them. There's a few things I point out here. The sheriff, W.B. Summers, and this is talking about whether there should be a jury, whether there should not be a jury, how the crime should be handled. And the grand jury came back and said and found a true bill. A true bill meant, yes, there is enough evidence to hold a trial. So they've been held in custody for 2 months, and now the case is going to go to trial. One thing that I found interesting here is it says that Joe Bauguess and John Bauguess, late of the county of Wilkes. To me, that means they had been held in custody somewhere other than Wilkes County. I don't know, maybe Raleigh or some state prison other than Raleigh. But in any case, they had been held in custody during that time. So what a grand jury does, they meet in secret and then come to their conclusion behind closed doors. There's no record of the discussion and the way that they come to that conclusion. The only exception to that rule is when they meet with witnesses. And they did meet with witnesses in this case. And we have a list of the witnesses that they talked to. One was Inez Bauguess. This is a picture of Inez. And this was Joe's youngest daughter. She would have been 17 years old at the time. Also, the next witness, Bill Billings. And this is a picture of Bill Billings. Now, there was more than one Bill Billings, but this picture here, this Bill Billings, he lived in the area right between Charlie Billings and Joe Bauguess. And actually, he was a brother of Joe's wife. So he was both a relative and a neighbor. Some of these others, I don't know who they are, but here's the sheriff, W.B. Summers, Dr. F.C. Hubbard, so he was the attending physician. Theodore Bauguess was another witness, and that was Joe's youngest son. And my theory is, I wonder if Theodore and Inez, being the youngest children, were still living at home and were maybe home at the time when Lester was shot, and that may be why they were called as witnesses. And along with Lester, they were the three youngest children. I'm going to pause here, and in the next video, I'll continue with how the case played out in court.